What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to another episode of 100 Tips That Only a Grandmaster Knows. This one I'm going to get right into straight away. You're looking at it on your screen right now. It has to do with this pawn structure. And the reason that I bring this up, it looks so specific, is this is actually a structure you can get fairly often. As long as you get that maybe bishop for knight exchange on f6, or more usually, it'll be the bishops exchanging on f5. Now, black will willingly take an exchange of the bishops on f5 because they can take back with the g-pawn and then use the g-file or maybe anchor a knight on e4. So it's very common for this to happen, and your opponents could castle kingside or queenside, but honestly, a lot of the games will be kingside castling here. So what I'm explaining is usually best applied when you're castled on the same side as your opponent. So if they castle kingside, you castle kingside, you can go for what I'm about to tell you. And the same thing if they castle queenside, you also castle queenside and go for it as well. But what I'm talking about is the way to play against this pawn structure, and it's not the way you might think. A lot of people just try to like anchor a knight on e5, but your opponent's going to do the same plan by sticking a knight here, and it's so annoying to deal with. It really is. See a lot of people just get into this position and honestly get mated, or just like feels like a stonewall on drugs or something, right? Like it's so strong. So it's really tough to deal with. But all you need to remember is that you need to break this with the pawn break g4. That's it. g4. Now you're not just going to play g4 and hang a pawn. What you're going to do is prepare it with h3, but specifically with f3, because what you actually want to do is you want to play g4, and you want to take with the f pawn, not the h pawn. This will open up these two files for your pieces, and this position almost always favors white. I've played so many games in this position because you actually have a line in the London system. I'll show you an example in just a second. But you have a line in the London where this happens all the time. You can also get this on the Caro-Kann. There really are so many lines that feature this particular structure. And in order to get those double pawns, all it takes is just that one bishop exchange. So it is actually really common. Depends on what openings you play, whether you've seen this. But it is helpful to know that no matter how you end up seeing this pawn structure, that's how you deal with it. A pawn break to g4. And yes, this works, obviously, no matter which color you're playing. So let me show you a few examples. Jumping right into it, this is a game I played against GM Joey. Anyone that plays on chess.com knows. I think this guy might have the most games ever played on the website. He literally plays all the time. And he's a Grandmaster, pretty good player. Let me just show you the opening. I just wanted to include the opening, and I'm going to breeze through it just because I wanted to mention how many different ways you can actually get to this position. So what we have here is a London, and it's a London where black fianchettos, but then this bishop, it doesn't always want to go to g4 because what's it going to do? Trade for the knight? I just get the bishop pair. So that's an option, but what black usually ends up doing is playing bishop f5 instead, saying, I actually want this pawn structure, e6 and knight e4, and I think this throws people off. I really do. But pay attention to how we set up the exact thing that I'm talking about. Of course, we want to go for f3 g4, but have a look at the position. You can't just do that, right? It doesn't make sense. So I'm actually going to combine an idea that we mentioned earlier in the 100 Tips series, and then we're going to elaborate specifically against this pawn structure, okay? So we're going to play knight e5. Of course, black can take it, but we just take back. We're not upset with that. In general, black almost never takes it. I played this variation so many times. I always hop the knight in. They never take. And I hop it right back to d3. Hopefully this is familiar to all of those 100 tip enthusiasts. This was our very first one, and truly it's one of my favorite. So we get to employ it once again, and whether or not black plays knight e4 or doesn't play knight e4, I don't care. I'm going f3, and my next move is just going to be g4. So have a look at this game. Rook g8, black plays quickly. This was a blitz game. I decided to go king h1, always a good idea to do. And even rook to g1, like how crazy is that? Just to play g4. Like that's how committed I was. I can't even say that what I did here was the absolute smartest thing to do, but it's not bad and it follows a very clear plan. So look how much I was like just going out of my way to get the move g4. It's because the resulting position like this, where you just have pressure on the e pawn, the f pawn, just gonna like bring the piece over. H3 stabilizes everything, and then maybe the knights can eventually jump to the e5 squared later. But this knight is so strong here, and we just have a nice open file to pressure. So this was the game. Decided to play rook f2. E3 is not possible, and eventually I played knight f1, knight e3. Completely took control over the f5 square, and it was a super, super easy win. So that was one game I played. I got a few more examples, and I just want to keep showing them because this one was a different opening, and we still got to the same type of position. Okay, so we had this. This is obviously the Caro-Kann, not the London. Very, very similar structure, right? And this is a typical line where white goes h3 to stop bishop g4 and says, well, look, you can't develop your bishop now. It's pretty annoying for black. So one of the main lines is bishop there. And let's have a look. Obviously, I played h3 already, so it's a little bit different from the previous one, but have a look at that knight e5 move. There it is again, castles, knight back to d3, castles myself, and we see this idea once again, king h8, and there's knight e4. Well, unsurprisingly, guys, I'm dealing with it with the move f3. Very strong idea. After taking, I mean, is anyone going to be shocked by the next move? If you've been watching so far, I hope not. It is going to be g4. And yes, even in the face of the rook, because I can play king h1 next, or in this case, king h2, which also works to defend that pawn. And this was just a really well-played game. Black decided to go for a line where, well, not decided, actually, had to, because the queen was trapped, had to go for a line like this, and I am going to get to take on f5, completely ruining the pawn structures, and this game is a win. It's a technical win from this point on, so it's just a matter of converting, and I was able to do so pretty nicely, but that's not the point of this video. Once again, you can just see how effective and how unexpected this g4 move is. Nobody ever thinks it's going to happen. It's such a weird concept that almost everyone who has this structure just thinks that it's impenetrable, like they're just going to put a knight on e4 and that's the end of the game. That's why I like to hop my knight into e5 to free up the f3 square for that pawn, and then drop it back immediately, following the very first tip in our series. And this pawn structure always gets dealt with by the move g4. It's really important to remember. If you ever see that structure, it might seem really weird to orchestrate this, but I promise you, this is the way to deal with that. Even in a bullet game, I decided to include this one. It was against a very strong opponent. And we see once again a London system. You're probably used to this opening, but really I have so many examples of this one opening line. And as I mentioned, you can use different openings and still get to the same type of position. Knight e5, knight back to d3, and almost everyone jumps the knight into e4 thinking, yeah, if we take, well, fantastic for black, but we never have any intention of taking. We just go f3, and then immediately g4. White already has an advantage on the engine of like +1. It's crazy. But I promise, like, not many of you would even think to play the move g4 because, I mean, it's so weakening in front of your king. To even move the knight out of the way to free up the square, a lot of us would just be in this position and think, okay, rook's to the middle, right? Queen out. The knight comes here, like, oh man, I got to take it. Oh, but I don't want to take it. How do I kick the knight? Oh, I got to move the pawn. Okay, but I got to move this knight. Okay, knight e5. Well, it might not be the best structure. This is a lot safer for black than what we've been doing, which is keeping that pawn out of the d5 square and playing f3 g4. So maybe I just described your potential exact thought process of the next moves you would play there, but I promise you it's not that weird. But once you know how to deal with this properly, why would you do anything else except this? So f3, g4, king h1, again, just always getting off that g file. And okay, in this game, this was a bullet game as well, so you can see how I've got that idea, g4, just completely dialed in. This is something that I just know works well. And look at this, just putting pressure on the f pawn there. It's so hard to deal with. We've got this coming, bishop f6, simple moves like bringing the rook to e1. The knight will hop into e5 next. King is almost going to get mated. And I end up in an endgame, up a pawn, went on to win the game very, very easily. Once again, though, the focus is remembering that this pawn structure can be dealt with by g4. But we just need to move the knight out of the way first. Knight on d3 is quite literally the best complement in the business to the moves f3 and g4. King h1, you'll notice, is a very common move as well. And the queen from d1 supports this move if necessary. We just play f3, g4. So that's how to deal with this pawn structure. I get it a lot in this particular opening because I happen to play the London. You might have other openings where it happens. The Caro-Kann is one of them, and I'm sure there are many others. Plus, it can happen reversed as well. Like this could be white, for example. I know in the Catalan, a lot of times white plays bishop to f4, and black either takes it and white takes with the g-pawn, or maybe knight h5 and white takes with the g-pawn. There are a number of positions like that. The f6, g5 idea could be considered against that structure as well because it's identical. So hopefully this gives you like just a few more tools to work with when you see this. I feel like a lot of people just kind of mindlessly develop in the center or just kind of like don't really know how to handle it. And the knight shows up on e4 and you panic and take it, and then they take back with the f-pawn and it just goes from bad to worse, right? But remember, if the king is obviously castle on the queen side and your king is over here, you don't want to just shove these pawns up because they're going to attack you. So of course, this works best when you're castled on the same side. So even if you're castled king side, this is still good, but I would avoid doing it if they castle queen side, for example. But hope this helps against this structure. It has helped me a ton. I feel like just this bit of understanding really elevates me over almost all my opponents whenever I get this line. I get it often, and I have a wicked win rate just because I always go for this, f3, g4. And to be honest, the position is always one that I enjoy playing. So hopefully that helps in your games as well. And once again, I will see everybody for the next tip in this series. Bye for now.